Previously, on part 1 of our Arizona Peace Trail special. After beginning our journey near Dateland, we headed north past the Palomas Mountains and into the wide plains outside of Kofa. We worked our way north through the desert on mostly smooth, sometimes rocky trails and rutted out wash crossings. After visiting a game and fish cabin, we found some old aerial directional markers before hitting Hoveder Road. At around 40 miles into the trail, we made camp for the night in the Little Horn Mountains. Today, we continue with day 2 along the Arizona Peace Trail. Upon leaving camp, we'll pass Coyote Peak and the Ronagras Plain before quickly crossing over I-10 and visiting a few old town sites in the Little Harquahala Mountains. We'll pass through Siloam to resupply before hitting our connection through the Butler Valley, where we'll visit the military ruins at Camp Bouse. We'll end the day over 80 miles away by dropping into the ghost town of Swansea. We were up just after the crack of dawn. It was a frigid morning as the temperature had dipped to the mid-30s. With the sun just barely peeking above the horizon and not quite hitting our campsite yet, we stayed in the tent a little longer as we let things warm up. A little while later, we were finally up and around. We fired up the propane stove and got some water boiling for a quick and warm oatmeal breakfast.
After a bite to eat, we began to work on breaking down our camp. We packed up the back of the Jeep with our kitchen gear and then turned to the tent. With all the flaps closed last night, the tent actually kept us quite warm throughout the night. We collapsed the tent and buttoned up camp before getting in the Jeep and on the trail just before 10 o'clock.
We returned to Hoveder Road and headed north. The road remained extremely wide and smooth, and we were able to cover the miles quickly. The trail quickly dropped into the Ronagras Plain, and the prominent Coyote Peak just up ahead broke up the otherwise flat horizon. As we neared Coyote Peak, a small earthen dam came into view on the left. This dam and the nearby monument was dedicated to Bob Crowder, an early Arizona pioneer cattleman. We continued north as the trail split upon passing Coyote Peak. From here, the trail really opened up. The trail had a few sandy sections, but overall was quite scenic. The pace remained fairly quick moving, which allowed us to make up some time from our later than expected start this morning.
The trail passed underneath power lines in an old corral as we eventually passed through a series of small hills just south of the I-10. "15 miles from camp, we reached a brief pavement section as the road passed over the CAP and reached Interstate 10. Here we quickly passed over the bustling interstate, and less than half a mile later, we were back on dirt. We were now on Harquahala Road, which remained wide and fast-moving as we headed deeper into the Little Harquahala Mountains.
After a few quick miles, we pulled off onto a lesser traveled trail and headed east to the Harquahala town site. Numerous buildings and mining remnants remain here, perched just a few hundred feet above the main trail. We parked the Jeep at a building with metal sidings on it and got out on foot to explore more in depth. This was Harquahala town site, which began in the late 1880s. Gold was discovered here in the Bonanza and Golden Eagle claims, and the area quickly boomed. The town was home to a post office and even had its own newspaper, the Harquahala Miner, at one point. Ownership changed hands around the turn of the century, as most of the high-grade ore had played out. The post office was discontinued in 1918, and although the town briefly reopened from 1927 to 1932, it quickly was abandoned.
Today, numerous buildings remain in varying states of decay. Past the town site sits remains of actual mines, which were rumored to have its fair share of high grading, or stealing ore from the company. The pink clay tailings spread around are evidence of chemical leaching that was used to treat ore on the site before hauling it via wagon to Sentinel near Gila Bend.
After a quick walk around the town site, we returned back to the main road where just a ways north we found the Harquahala Cemetery off on the left. This small cemetery lays to rest those residents of Harquahala that lost their lives while working and living in the area. All of the graves are unmarked, and one interesting one remains encased in concrete. A short distance up the trail, we once again split off the main road as we headed east to attempt to see some more mining ruins. It didn't take long to find some more mining tailings near the Golden Eagle mine. However, we were stopped in our tracks and forced to turn around by some no trespassing signs. While we didn't see any active workings, someone clearly still owns the property and mining efforts that remain off the trail side today. We continued back the way we came and eventually returned back to Harquahala Road.
We continued north as the road climbed. About 12 miles north of I-10, we began to pass through the outskirts of Siloam. It is here we quickly aired up our tires before getting back to a brief highway stint. Airing up was a quick process that was made easy now that we had a hardwired compressor into the back of the Jeep. In Siloam, we hit a small gas station to top off the tanks and grab a quick bite to eat. The pizza didn't seem fresh, but we certainly weren't complaining about it. From Siloam, we continued east on the highway, where in the small town of Wendon, we turned north along Alamo Lake Road. After our short 20-mile highway cruise, we turned off the paved road near Cunningham Pass. It was here that we would pick up our dirt road connector through Butler Valley to get to the west branch of the AZPT trail. The trail followed along the power lines northwest. While rough at first, the trail eventually became smoother. After passing through a gate, we pulled off the main road again at our next stop.
We followed the road east before parking and getting out at the flagpole, which marked the site of the former Camp Bouse. Camp Bouse was part of General George S. Patton's massive 31,000 square mile desert training center and California-Arizona maneuver area. This area was used during World War II to prepare troops for combat in North Africa. Camp Bouse was just one of many military installations spread across western Arizona and California. Camp Bouse, however, was unique. Opened in August of 1943, this camp here was used for a top-secret project nicknamed the Gizmo. The Gizmo, better known now as the Canal Defense Light, was a 13 million candle power light mounted to the tops of M3 tanks and designed to confuse and stun enemy troops. Go ahead and insert your best light bar joke here. Around 10,000 troops were stationed here as part of the 9th Tank Group and numerous other special armored battalions, which were all under top secret orders to never share what happened here. Numerous buildings were constructed as part of the installation. A hospital and surgery center were built on top of these cement foundations on the north end of camp. Training here was so secretive that if anyone was injured, they had to remain on camp property to avoid any possibility of information being leaked. A huge water reservoir, a large pit rumored to be used for boxing matches and other entertainment, and numerous other buildings and sidewalks were built here at Camp Bouse. The camp shut down in mid-1944 after the troops were deployed to Europe. Most buildings were removed after the war, however cement foundations and pads remain today. Upon further investigation, tank tracks can even be found on the desert floor between the camp and the firing ranges further to the north.
While we thoroughly enjoyed our time at Camp Bouse, it was now around 3:30 and time to continue our way to camp. We returned to the Powerline Road and continued northwest. The road remained mostly smooth. After around 10 miles, we reached Midway Junction and continued north. At a remote four-way intersection, we proceeded east towards our overnight stop. The road reached a steep grade and dropped down towards the ghost town of Swansea. Just after the 80-mile mark for the day, we arrived at Swansea at the bottom of the hill.
The ruins at Swansea are spread out along the hillside. An extensive walking tour connects many of the more important spots. We parked the Jeep and got out on foot to check out some of the main ruins. The story of Swansea began in the 1860s, when the area was first prospected. However, mining here wouldn't take off until after 1900, when the railroad was built in the nearby town of Parker. After two miners, Newton Evans and T.J. Kerrigan, built a furnace, water pipeline, and hoists for the mine shafts on site, people quickly began to recognize the potential of the area. In 1908, the Clara Gold and Copper Mining Company set up headquarters in the town, which was originally called Signal. The town quickly swelled to over 400 residents. Originally, ore was hauled via rail to the Gulf of California, and then via boat to South Wales in the United Kingdom. After a smelter was built on site here in 1909, the new town bared the name of the former milling town in Wales, Swansea. The town had nearly everything: a post office, electric company, lumber company, theaters, and even an auto dealer at one point. However, after more money was spent promoting the town than was actually being pulled out of the ground, the decline of Swansea was imminent. The town was open on and off through World War I. However, in 1937, the town was shut down for good, but not before pulling out a whopping 27 million pounds of copper out of the ground.
Since its decline, the BLM has taken efforts to preserve the town site today. Buildings have been protected and stabilized, and informational signs dot the landscape today. Large metal grates cover the once deep vertical shafts. After walking around the town for a while to see some of the old buildings, we proceeded down the tailing pile to our camp for the night. We would be staying at one of the 5 primitive campgrounds the BLM has established in Swansea. Each campground had a small ramada and table, a fire ring, and a nice flat area. The campsite we stayed at was named after T.J. Kerrigan, one of the original founders of the town, and sat just north of the company house ruins.
We made it to camp just before sunset. We quickly got our kitchen set up and tent deployed before beginning on the night's dinner. Tonight we would be having chicken fajitas and rice. And dinner cooked up pretty quick. We sat down to enjoy it as the darkness quickly enveloped our camp and the surrounding abandoned town site. A layer of clouds began to roll in and the moonlight lit up the area quite nicely. Even though today had been a pretty busy day, we sat around the campfire late into the night before finally crawling up into the rooftop tent around 11:30.
Next time, we continue along the Arizona Peace Trail as we leave the ghost town of Swansea and cross the Bill Williams River at the historic town of Planet. We will enter Mojave County as the trail gets rougher and narrower through a series of wash channels and hills outside Lake Havasu City. After a bumpy day, we will stop for the night in the Mojave Mountains near Interstate 40 as we hunker down for the incoming rainstorm.